So here we go. I wanted to start by just explaining and reminding you of those two most helpful tips that I have for you. So the first is to have your picture folded and as close to what you're drawing as possible. And I know that seems like not that big of a tip, like that seems pretty common sense, but it does really make a huge difference as you're working. My second biggest tip that we talked about last time was using this value finder and actually checking your values as you go to make sure that like this is how you check. Like there is a right way to match your values, and that is to actually compare them to each other and make sure that they are matching. So that's what you are going to be focused on today, having those two things next to you. Now we went through and the first step was filling in the white so that we could blend it out without it mixing with the black. That was our first step. So you should have all of the white filled in and blended out. It is very difficult to go back and blend white after you've started adding black without getting that weird blue color. So I highly encourage you at the beginning of class to look at yours and compare it with your value finder to make sure that you've got all of the values that are less than a 6. So everything that's less than a 6 in this picture should already be put down. Next, we worked on our facial features, and I like to go in that order specifically because when I'm working with charcoal, the biggest concern is that you will make a big mess. Like you don't want to like work super hard on something and then smudge it or smear it or have stuff go over the top of it. It's really upsetting. And so that's why we're working through this process in this exact way. So you start with the white, then you move into your facial features. And I like to do that because this is a minimal amount of charcoal. And I like that because if say we started with the hair, and I like had all of the hair done, which would make sense because oftentimes you start on the left if you're right-handed and then work your way to the right, which if we were doing that, that means I would have started with this hair on the side. But if I had done that, I would have, so much charcoal on my paper that the chance of it having smudges is a lot higher. And so that's why I save the hair for after I've finished my facial features so that then I can make sure that I don't have too much charcoal on my paper that is like going to be smudging. Now the problem is that if I am working on my hair over here because I still have to fill that in, the problem is that my right hand is going to be moving over the top of it. So to help with that, we are going to grab a scratch piece of paper, a piece of printer paper, and while you guys are doing some of these things, you can set your hand down on top of it and have that covering and protecting your facial features so that you can move your hand around and you're not smudging anything. All right, so now I'm going to introduce the next steps, which after you have completed the white values all the way through minus the hair, and once you have completed both eyes, the nose, and the mouth, the next step is to come in and start adding all of the dark values with your black charcoal pencil on the face itself. So I like to start by adding like a solid patch of black. So for example, like in this section here, I might just go through and kind of give myself this little section of solid black, and I'm going to just have my image as close to my paper as I can get it so I can make sure that I'm following along with these shapes the best that I can. And I've got just this solid black section. Now I like to add at least one solid black section because then when I'm working with my blending stump, I like to think of it like I'm painting. Like there's nothing inside of this blending stump that's coming out like a pencil, right? Nothing like ink or anything in there. So I like to think of it more of like a paintbrush. Like there's nothing in a paintbrush, but you need to dip it in something to make it work. So that's why I laid this section out so that now I can come in and steal from that area and I can use it to start darkening up some of these spaces. And there are some very subtle areas typically, and I'm gonna clean my blending stump off so I know it's lighter, but we do have some areas that we just need to dust lightly with our blending stumps. So see how like the side of this mouth is a little bit on the darker side. So I'm kind of blending that out and into that shadow that we worked on for underneath our nose. Remember that we are trying to leave some of that gray tone between the white and the black values so that we don't accidentally get that weird blue color that happens when our white mixes with our black. So we want to fade out to the gray of the paper from both the black end and the white end so that what shows through is actually the gray of the paper, not necessarily a gray that you are creating. So we're just going in and adding some of these values, and I'm noticing as I'm adding this that this looks a little light. I might check it and say, okay, what value is it actually underneath the chin? And I'd say it's an 8. So I'm going to come over here and check it, and I'm pretty close, but I could go a little bit darker. So I'm going to steal some of this value from that little puddle, not puddle, but like a spot that I gave myself to steal from. And now I'm going to take some of that value and bring it over into this space. And there are a lot of teeny tiny little details as you're going through and completing this step. Like, for example, this smidge of a highlight that's like right underneath my lip. So I am just trying to leave that tiny little sliver of highlight, and just tiny details like that make or break your project. Portraits really rely on those tiny details. So the more little tiny details you can find to incorporate, the more it will look like your portrait. So you are just going back and forth and trying to match these values. You can steal from your values to bring in a little bit more dark, but something to know about that is that as we are stealing values, it will make that area you're stealing from much lighter. So now I have been stealing from this area. I probably need to go back in and sharpen that space up so that I still have that solid black in my image. Does that make sense? Now that is how you are adding your values to your face with black. Next, I want to show you how to draw hair. And this is the opposite of what I taught you for the face. So I want to just remind you that with the face, we started with white, blended it out, and then brought in the black. For hair, we're starting with solid black, blending it out to medium, and then bringing white in on top of it. So it's like the exact opposite of what we just did. And when I'm working on hair, I like to find specific shapes of black. So I've already started just a little bit through here. I'm going to first lay down my piece of printer paper so that I am not smudging my facial features as I'm working on this. I'm also going to fold my paper so that this is as close to what I'm working on as possible. So here's my little hair section. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm looking for areas that are a solid shape of black. So like right here, I found this little diamond, like a swoopy diamond right here, and then like a half circle. And now I'm like adding in this kind of rectangle that's coming down. And then I've got this edge that's like showing with a little bit of that lightness coming through. So I'm like adding in this black triangle right now. Now I'm going to come in next with my blending stump, and I want to make sure that I'm taking away the grainy texture, because with hair, we know that hair is very smooth. So seeing this grainy texture on hair makes it not look as realistic. So we want to be extra careful about not leaving any grains. Now I'm going to go in and add some of the medium tones, like this section kind of wrapping up and through this space right here. So I'm adding in my medium tones, and I might even leave a little bit of the gray of the paper showing as well. So now I'm wrapping that down along this little stretch of hair, and I've got like this black on the other side. So I'm just going to add that in at this point just to show you a little section. Now I am going to work on blending all of these spaces out, and that is what you should do all the way through. And I would recommend going all the way through your hair and adding the black all the way through your medium tones, all the way through. And then when you're done, coming back in and adding the highlights over the top of it. So what I'm doing right now is to show you just like a small section so that I can show you all of the steps. but I would prefer that you do all of the black of your hair and then all of the gray tones and then come in to do this next part. So what we're going to do after we've blended everything out, so mine is clearly not blended enough, but pretend like it is. So now I've got these sections of my hair, and this is the part that makes it look so much more realistic, is to take your white pencil, and I'm looking for a spot where there's like a crispy bit, you know, where there's flat edges don't make nice skinny lines for hair. So we want to avoid the flat spots and look for a nice point. So I'm finding a good point, and then in the middle of these curves, typically when hair has a curve, that is where the light hits. So we want to add highlights on the curves, and typically if something like hair is curving in, that is where the shadow would be. So where you see it bowing out is where highlights are, where it curves in is where a shadow is, typically. But we're going from our reference photo. So I'm going to find a nice sharp edge of my charcoal pencil, and I'm adding in specific lines while looking at my reference photo to make sure that I am drawing them in the correct location and in the correct direction. So I'm looking at this and I'm adding just like skinny little white lines going over the top of wherever I added it. So it's either going to go over the top of medium tones or over the top of black. Now we do not want to blend the white. Don't take a Q-tip, don't use a blending stump. We want these lines to show. So we're gonna go through and we're just adding all of these little white lines. And like I said, you can do it all the way through with like all of your darks and medium tones, or if it works better for you and the way that you work as an artist, you can do it just little section by section like this as well, and that's totally fine. But these are the steps, and I want you to make sure that you are adding your black first, medium tones, and then those white highlights over the top. Okay, so that's where we'll pause for now, and I'll let you guys work, and as soon as I've got people ready for the next demo, I'll pause you again and show you the next step. All right, thank you guys.